What's up, you guys? My name is Grace Lauren Taylor, and you are listening to episode 12 of the Trauma Dump Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Here at the Trauma Dump Podcast, we seek to answer the question, what is mental health? How do I take care of my own, and how do I support others? This week, we will be discussing the topic of
Dialectical behavioral therapy,
DBT, with a professional licensed counselor named Erin O'Brien. Go check her out after the episode over on Instagram to support her for being on this episode. Just a quick disclaimer before we start. Though we are interviewing a licensed counselor, I am not one. I am not a mental health professional in any way, shape, or form. I'm just a person who has experienced a lot of trauma and has been diagnosed with PTSD, ADHD, and a lot of other mental health disorders, and I have physical disabilities. If you or someone that you know is struggling or is in a crisis, we have resources available in our description on both YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and we have so many resources in our Discord. So please join us over on our Discord where you can share anonymously anything that you're going through and get peer support from all of us over there. We also have many different channels of discussion that include more than just trauma. You are so welcome and loved, and we would love to get to know you and support you in any way, shape, or form that you would prefer. So please come join us over on our Discord. This podcast only seeks to create community and further understanding of these difficult topics that are so often misunderstood and so often overlooked. So if you have any topic that you would like us to discuss in further episodes, please leave them in the chat down below or in our comment section over on YouTube. DBT was first developed by Marsha Linehan in the 1970s to help treat borderline personality disorder. According to Psychology Today, DBT is a structured program of psychotherapy with a strong educational component designed to provide skills for managing intense emotions and negotiating social relationships. It was originally developed to curb the self-destructive impulses of chronic suicidal patients, and it is also the treatment of choice for borderline personality disorder, emotional dysregulation, and a growing array of psychiatric conditions. It consists of group instruction and individual therapy sessions, both conducted weekly for 6 months to a year. DBT has proven to be effective for treating and managing a wide range of mental health conditions, including borderline personality disorder, self-harm, suicidal behavior, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse disorder, eating disorders, specifically binge eating disorder and bulimia, depression, and anxiety. DBT skills aim to help enhance your abilities in day-to-day life. The 4 skills your therapist will teach include mindfulness, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and emotion regulation. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully aware and focused in the present instead of worrying about your past or your future. The skill of distress tolerance involves understanding and managing your emotions in difficult or stressful situations without responding in harmful behaviors. Interpersonal effectiveness means understanding how to ask for what you want and need, and setting boundaries while maintaining respect for yourself and for others. Emotion regulation means understanding, being more aware and having more control over your emotions. Talking to a mental health professional can help you start to heal. Therapeutic options may include a number of trauma-informed therapies, such as cognitive processing therapy, CPT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, TFCBT, eye movement and desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, among others.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome on the podcast. So you are a licensed therapist, correct?
Yes, I am a licensed therapist, and I'm working on my DBT certification, which, as I think I mentioned to you, is sort of in progress. I'm waiting to find out if I actually got it, which, fingers crossed, I think that I will, but
I'm sure you will.
We'll get back to you at a later date.
Yeah.
Once I find out.
If you find out before this episode posts, because this posts on the 1st of October, then I will put it in like the notes or up on the screen that, yes, she did it.
Yes. Oh my God. Like one of those shows where like they post like the update for like what happened after the fact. Okay. That works.
Definitely. Yeah. I will definitely do that. So let me pull up my notes. All right. So before we get into the interview, before we talk about all the juicy things that you've been through and your therapist background, I would like to ask you what your pronouns are so everyone refers to you in the way that you would wish to be referred to as.
She, her, hers.
Okay, great. And are you comfortable discussing your personal experiences?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And to make sure that I'm not crossing any of your boundaries, feel free to interrupt me at any time if you feel uncomfortable or triggered, or if you don't want that question, just be like, cut it out right now. I will definitely. And if you ever want to just talk to me and not to the podcast, you can just say, hey, just pause the recording. I'll pause the recording and we can just chat. And if you don't feel like answering a question, just say, I'm not going to answer it. So my priority is to make sure you feel safe, that you're not disclosing anything you don't want to disclose, so that we can have this conversation in a very open and safe environment.
It's kind of funny that you're saying, I like that you're saying all that, but it's kind of funny because I feel like I'm usually the one that's saying all of that. So it's different to be like, oh, I get that extended to me as well.
Yes, definitely. I had 4 interviews this week, and they were 3 to 5 hours long each. And one of my interviews, the young lady, we were discussing really, really triggering topics. And I gave my like disclaimer, like if you need to stop, you can stop. And she used it 5 different times to kind of calm herself down, to, be zen in the moment. And it's really beneficial, because I think when we're talking about some of these really triggering topics, it's important to make sure that the guest feels safe discussing these things, because it's hard. It's hard sometimes. I had to take a break a couple times too, because I was crying and my makeup was running. I was like, I gotta fix it. But yeah, I'm really excited for this podcast, because I think it will help end a lot of stigma around mental health issues. And I know that you as a therapist, that's kind of one of your biggest goals, right? Is to help people talk and open up about what they're going through.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I'll say this is, as a therapist, like you're always walking this fine line between what you, I guess, like comfortably or ethically can disclose to a client. And I find that interesting, especially in the mental health field. And I understand why it's there. I do. And I never want to be somebody that overshares or obviously monopolizes anybody's session. But I also think that when we talk about specifically like recovery from addiction, in that sense, people are way more encouraged to talk about their own experiences with recovery, especially if they are, let's say, a therapist that's in recovery. And it's somehow, I guess, in my experience, been treated different when it comes to mental health. And the perspective that I always operate from as a therapist and a person is to me, there's not a very definitive line. And maybe this is part of my problem between who I am as a person and who I am as the therapist. And so sometimes like when, people are kind of asking me like about my own experiences, like I have to walk again, that fine line between like, what can I say? And like, what would be helpful? Like always in the vein of helping that client feel less alone and normalized. And I've been told by a lot of the people that I work with that I do that they often feel like they can relate to me. I can relate to them. And it helps them to see that somebody, relatively with it together on the other side of those experiences can relate to what they're going through. And maybe there's some hope in that.
Yes, I definitely think that there's hope in that. My therapist, I love her to death. Which she's never going to be on the podcast because I think that's like a little bit too much. I think we would dish way too much. But she has told me that when you're a therapist, you like build this relationship with your client, and you have to make sure that it's not exactly mutual, because you as a therapist need to also be able to step outside of like the bubble and have your own life. And she has told me, like, when she first started as a therapist, she would come home crying about some of her clients. She's like, I just want to fix their problem. I can't fix their problem. And I think it's, being a therapist is such a beautiful thing. Like, you are the healers of really my generation. My generation is becoming more trauma informed because of the work of all these therapists laying the foundation of, I'm here to listen to you, and I'm here to give you resources. And I really appreciate therapists out there. You guys rock. Oh my goodness. And it must be such a difficult job.
It is, like, there are aspects to it that definitely are difficult. And then there are aspects to it that I think, that's the whole reason why I became a therapist. It's why I like what I do. I think in terms of what makes it difficult would be exactly what you were just saying, is that you get somebody that you really care about and you want to help them. And I think one of the lessons I learned early on as a therapist, especially in training, was that I can't save people and I can't fix people. And, all I can really do is be sort of the person that shows up and sits with them and validates and encourages and gives them tools and shows them how to use those tools, maybe point them in the direction of resources. But in order for somebody, I guess, if we're talking about really what does it mean to be fixed or saved, that really comes from that individual. And that's also coincidentally why I love therapy, is because you are empowered, especially when you're working with a great therapist, you feel empowered, like, I can make this happen for me. And that's the idea, right? Is that at some point you may not see me anymore as your therapist, and you can still take everything you've learned from me and feel empowered to be able to continue that work without me.
Yes. So, yes, yeah. Definitely. I love what you said. It's like, take that work and continue to feel empowered. It's so eloquent. I mean, I've had so many therapists, and
Same.
a lot of, so you've been to therapy, yeah?
Oh, since I was 19. I just turned 39. I had to think about it for a second the other day. So for, 20 years, I've been going to therapy since I was 19. And that's sort of, something I was thinking we would talk about in this episode, is that whole experience, because that is actually why I became a therapist. Is, I worked with some incredible therapists that are out there now, like, expanding their practices. And I feel really, really proud as like having been a client that knew them before they did all of that. And in a lot of ways, I felt like that really was the training that I had as a therapist, more than going to classes and reading books. Like, who I am as a therapist and a person is shaped by those people that helped me along the way. So yeah, I've been going to therapy since I was 19. I still go to therapy. Shout out to my therapist, Scott. He might watch this, so I'll say hi to him. So there we go.
Hi, Scott. Hello. Yeah. So you haven't always wanted to be a therapist.
No. And that's, I think for me, that's one of the most interesting parts of my story, is that I was never going to be a therapist. When I, was in high school, rather, I was very creative and into art, but I ended up taking like all the honors courses and stuff, which in hindsight, I kind of wish I had focused more on art. But anyhow, I ended up, going to college to focus on fine art and interior design. And that's what I studied in. I had one psychology course. And, at the same time that I was starting college, I started therapy when I was 19. And then through the years, like after I finished college, it was 2007 and we were in a recession. So nobody was really looking to hire people in the arts. And it can be very difficult to make a living in the arts just to begin with. But I remember going on all these interviews and just feeling really defeated because I wasn't finding work. And so I ended up working different jobs. Like I worked at a bookstore, I worked as a nanny, and I did that for about 5 years until, and all the same time going to therapy, the highs and the lows. I worked with a bunch of different therapists, and there was one therapist in particular. And it was funny because like in a weird way, I was surrounded by them. Even like when I was a nanny, the woman that I worked for is a psychologist. So like I was surrounded by that. Talk about like a sign from the universe, I feel like. But I remember this one therapist in particular. I went to see her one day and she said to me, you know, how much she enjoyed having me as a client, and then said, you know, I feel like I could take a break and send my next client in and you would be able to do the session. And I don't know what my face looked like, but I must have just looked at her like, are you okay? Because like me. And that I feel like just planted the tiniest seed in my mind of like, this could be something you could do. And I remember mulling it over and over and over and talking about it with like friends and family and my therapists and, you know, like, what do you think about that? And everybody, like, it was like a resounding, like, yeah, why didn't we think of this before? Like, you would be good at this, you know? And I think about like over my life, I was that person that people would gravitate towards to talk to, you know, and I would just listen and, you know, kind of give them support a lot similarly to what I do now, just in an official capacity. And it's interesting too, because when I was younger, like I was that person, even I feel like in my family, that was sort of like family therapist, parentified child. So I feel like my whole life has just been leading up to this job that I take, this person that I am. And I think about it too. I'm like, when I was younger, you know, it wasn't something that I ever thought about. I never thought, oh, you're going to grow up and be a therapist someday. You know, it just wasn't something that I had really thought about. But then once I got into graduate school, I really felt like it felt natural to me, you know, where when I was pursuing, you know, jobs in like fine art, interior design, it was an uphill battle to even get into the door to get interviewed. But with this, like, and I was so surprised. I thought, you know, I applied to all these grad schools. I thought, you're not going to get in. And I got into every single one of them, including Penn, which was something I was like, you're never going to get into that. You're never going to get into that. I got into it. And it was just, I guess to me, it feels like it was meant to be, if there is such a thing, because of the fact that those doors that had felt previously like they were just locked were now open. And ever since I went back to graduate school, like it's just been continuing to build off of everything that I've done, and now being in private practice. And, you know, I sometimes sit there and I genuinely look back and think, how the hell did I get here? Like, how did this happen? You know, for me, especially given everything that I went through. So,
yes, that's so inspiring. And I want to go back to what you said on you felt like a parentified child. I resonate with that 100%. I am the oldest of 3. I have 2 younger brothers, and I was a parentified child, like very much so. I did all the cooking and cleaning for my family, all of it from the age of 10. And when I went off to college, my mother resented me heavily because I guess she recognized all the stuff that I did. And I remember I bought a really nice Dyson vacuum, the pet one that like sucks up all the pet hair. And I bought it. It was like $500 something, and I brought it with me to college. And I got this like 5 days into being at college, I got a text message that, bring back my vacuum. I need it for your damn dog.
Oh, wow.
I was like, wow. And she would tell me all the time, she's like, well, I'm not paying for your college unless you come back every weekend to clean. And she never paid for my college. My dad did. And I remember one weekend I cleaned for her house top to bottom, and I baked her brownies. And I left the brownies in the tray there for her. As soon as I got to Lubbock, from Dallas to Lubbock, 5-hour drive, as soon as I got to Lubbock, she was like, why did you leave me this empty dish just for me to clean it? Wasn't this your job for you to clean the whole house? It's like,
So you bring up a good point around like where we fit into the family dynamic and the family role. And that's something I feel like the closer I've gotten to turning 40 in a year, the more that I have realized, you know, my part in the role that I played and stepping away from that because I don't want that to continue. And I think it's hard because like when we talk about parentified child, if somebody out there is like, I don't know exactly what you mean, you know, we're talking about like a child, essentially you're growing up much faster than your peers. You are in positions in which you are maybe privy to adult experiences that most people in your age group would not have access to. And you are, you know, sometimes tasked with doing things that most adults would either need to take care of or wouldn't know how to do. And for me, you know, that did happen. And I don't think that for me either. My parents, it was never like they set out to like, you're going to do these things, you're going to be in this role. I think it was just a chaotic situation that I grew up in, like very chaotic. And I being a person who likes to help, and I like to say reformed people pleaser, I naturally fell into that role of like, I'll do it. I'll take care of this. I'll do this.
Yeah.
And I think as an adult, like I can still see how that happens as like being the go-to person for things, like the person that keeps track of important dates in the family and reminds everybody so-and-so's birthday is coming up and so this is happening. And, you know, and even like before I became a therapist, still feeling like a family therapist, like if there's conflict, as long as it's not directly with me, I'm trying to manage it for everybody. I'm trying to make it better. And so it's been a really difficult process, I think, as an adult to step out of that because it's so what I'm used to. And at the same time, I feel like that took away opportunities I could have had as a child to just be a child, to be unburdened by hearing about like your parents' separation and then they're together and the divorce and all the things that come along with that. You know, there was one specific memory that I can talk about, and I did process this, you know, with my therapist, where I was 9 years old and there was conflict in the house, and my brother and sister and I, you know, were going to go with one of my mom's friends. Like when there was conflict, we might be, you know, picked up by somebody, so we weren't there. And you know, my sister, I'm the middle child. She's 4 years younger than me, and my brother's 2 years older than me. But in this specific memory, you know, my sister and I were sharing a bedroom, and I was trying to pack up a suitcase of things to take with us. And at 9 years old, you know, I'm putting clothing in there, the toothbrush, I'm doing all that. And if I'm 9, that means I'm terrible at math, but my sister is like 4 or 5 at the time. And I remember looking over at her and she's packing toys in a suitcase because she doesn't know, right? She doesn't know I need to pack clothes and stuff. And that always stood out to me because I remember then I started packing for the both of us, you know, because it was like I instinctively knew, okay, she can't understand, you know, so packing up clothes for you and your little sister in one suitcase, it was like that memory, you know, if we talk about trauma, was traumatizing. I think it was at that point that whether I knew it or not, there was some part of me that was like, okay, you're going to have to help. You're going to have to take care of your sister. You're going to have to be there for your family. And again, I don't think my parents ever were like, yes, that's going to be you, but our actions have consequences to it. And one of those consequences is how it, you know, when there's trauma in a household and chaos, how it impacts every person as an individual and as a whole. And so that memory always stood out to me as I was growing up of like, you know, that's my little sister. And even though she's obviously much older now, it's still my little sister.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Definitely. And oh my goodness, gave me chills, like saying you had to pack for your little sister because she did not grasp what was actually going on. Because I mean, being that family therapist, being that family healer, being like the scapegoat, the brunt of, you know, the weight of all this trauma residing on you to try and fix it, to be mommy's helper, stuff like that. That was my whole life. And when my father was hit by a car in the middle of COVID, June 2020, in our front yard, when he was hit by a car, I was very parentified my whole life, but I was parent. My mother completely isolated herself with my dad in the hospital. I only got to be with my dad a handful of times before he died, which was a year and a half later. And I had to do everything for myself and my siblings. She took us off of the health insurance, the car insurance, the phone plan. We had no money for food. We had legitimately nothing. And I had to figure that out for me and my siblings. And on top of that, one of my brothers was going off to college with me, going to Texas Tech with me. I had to move him into his dorm all by ourselves. Like, we were lucky that two old ladies, volunteered themselves to help us pay for things that he needed. But I was the one who had to figure out all the things that he needed for his college dorm and make sure he was all moved in. And it was a lot. And I have no idea whether or not my mother intended upon what she did. But now, as an adult, I'm 23 years old, so I'm a very young adult, but as an adult, I have completely stepped back from that entire family since my father's death, because with my therapist, I've recognized that I can't be the family fixer anymore, because now it's affecting my health. Now it's causing me to have panic attacks. Now I'm having non-epileptic seizures anytime I get stressed out. Now I can't go in public by myself. And my siblings are not affected in the same way, like, at all. And I'm so glad that they're not. I'm so glad that they don't have the pains that I have. But in the same breath, they're very angry with me because I don't want to talk to my mom at all. She's mistreated me countless times. She does have bipolar disorder, so she'll flip-flop between loving us and despising us, like saying, I love you, sweetie, to you're the worst thing that has ever happened to me, like you're the most self-centered person in the world, like get a barrage of those range of text messages. And I've told both my siblings that I don't want anything to do with her at all. And I think now that I've had like a couple months of just nothing to do with her and their issues, because they would always come to me with any issues, any interpersonal issues within them, and I was always the fixer. And now I'm like, wow, I've never once taken care of myself. I've never once put myself first. Have you had that realization yourself?
So many times. Like, I don't mean to laugh, like more times than I can count. And it's really, I feel like this year for me, it sounds so cheesy, but if there was like a word that signifies where I've been at in therapy, it's reckoning. Like reckoning and reconciling where my life has been and the people in it, and realizing that, I matter.
Yes.
I matter. And my birthday, was Wednesday. And I really took that and was like, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing. And I'm not going to worry about what everybody else wants from me, because it's my birthday.
Yes.
And so really living that life of like, okay, you matter. You've always mattered. What you've wanted and needed has always mattered. Really trying to live with that message has been a huge undertaking, because I think with trauma, it compromises us in so many ways, and it compromises your brain, your body, the way that you interact with the world, your habits, your routine, like even your breathing patterns. And like, for me, I've done all kinds of therapy. I've done EMDR and trauma therapy. That's been the most recent one over the last several years. Again, shout out to my boy, Scott, my therapist. He's a wizard, with EMDR. And I am so grateful that I found him, because that has helped me tremendously. I've done DBT. I did that in my early 20s, probably when I was about your age. I've done exposure therapy for OCD. I did a breathing treatment for 3 weeks to manage panic attacks. So I have, whatever anybody said to me, do you want to try this? I was like, yep, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that and that and that and that. And that, I think, for me was just that such a desire to just exist and take care of myself and overcome things, which I'm grateful for whatever power moved me and, you know, helped foster that resilience and like desire to see these things through. You know, when I was 19, it wasn't like there was some specific event that set it off where I was like, you're going to go to therapy. And there was no one that said you need to go to therapy. I just remember, and this is entirely true, people always look at me like, how could you possibly have had this conclusion? But at 19, I remember like looking around me and seeing the chaos and seeing the people I love and care about in my family and the struggles, in particular my parents, and thinking, don't let that be you. You know, don't let that be you. Like, don't wait until you are much older to deal with your stuff, because the longer I feel like you wait, no, it's never too late to start therapy. But for me, I just felt like the longer you wait, the more likely it is that it's going to be harder to maybe work on these things because you'll get more set in your ways. And I don't want, you know, whatever I choose to do with the rest of my life to be impacted by this, because I didn't ask for any, not that anybody does, I didn't ask for any of the things that happened to me. And so realizing though, like what I can do is I can try and change something. And that's where we made the phone call. You know, my mom was supportive, helped me make the phone call for my first therapist. And then that was that. And oddly enough, it was funny. Like my dad has always been a big supporter of me going to therapy. I mean, I could not have done any of it without his financial support and the fact that he really encouraged me as well. But I even remember, like, it was funny, 6 months into that first therapy, you know, we were out to dinner. I think he said something to me like, well, do you think, kiddo, you know, you're almost done with therapy now? And he's like, 39. And I'm like, no, I'm not done with therapy yet. I don't know that I ever will be. And oddly enough, now I'm a therapist too. So very full circle moment for me, you know?
Yes, it is a very full circle moment, and it's honestly very beautiful. I'm so glad that you had supportive parents in your healing journey and that wanted to help, you know, finance your healing journey.
Yeah, that I definitely had. I mean, the process of going through therapy though really it was me, you know, it wasn't like that they wouldn't have been supportive, but they weren't nearly as involved, you know, and not necessarily because they wouldn't have wanted to be, but sometimes that can be difficult for people to come to, let's say, family therapy. I, in particular, do not like doing family therapy. I don't like doing couples therapy because there's so many different personalities in the room. It can be, and that's probably where I do get triggered, where I'm like, oh, how do I manage this chaos that's unfolding in the office? And so I don't like it. But I think for me, like, it was just critical and not even knowing like necessarily what I wanted to get out of it. It was more, I just don't want to end up regretting that I didn't try this sooner, at least try it. And I feel like when I did that, you know, when I was in high school, I was very different than I am now. I mean, no tattoos, I don't even know how you would describe my style. I don't think it's quite alternative. I don't know what it is, but I was not that person. I was very quiet, very shy. And now in looking back, I was like, I was incredibly depressed and unhappy and miserable. And I did not have any way of expressing it because in that time, I didn't know anybody my age that went to therapy, not like they do now. And I realized, like, coming out of that when I started college, is like, I was incredibly angry. Like that anger was just like simmering, I think, the whole time, like a pot underneath the surface, just waiting for some moment for it to explode. And I don't blame myself for that because, again, I didn't have an outlet in which I was using to express how I was feeling. And, you know, when I talk with my therapist a lot about things I experienced as a child, he likes to remind me, he's like, you know, this could have been something that could have been reported. And it helps. And sometimes for me to hear that is like, okay, so what you experienced is not what is, I guess we say, normal. Because when you're growing up in chaos, you do think it's normal, right? You don't know any different. So to you, it's like, this is normal. What do you mean you don't have, you know, people yelling all the time? What do you mean that you don't have people slamming doors and getting mad? You know, and so for me, it's like talking about this and like obviously wanting to share, but being cautious because even at the end of the day, like with everything that I've been through, like I do genuinely love my family, my parents, are not together. They're divorced. My dad is remarried, and I'm close to my stepmother and my stepsister, and then my mom is not remarried. But I am close with each sibling, parent in my own way. In fact, I often say this, and I don't know that they would all agree, but I feel like I have been sort of the common thread that ties it together, because wanting everybody to try to get along, doing the best that I could to patch that up, patching up my own parents. Like, I joke around and say, I am like everybody's emergency contact, and it's like, it wasn't even as if, I think they don't always see that that's what's going on, that, oh, we are relying on you to be the person to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so that I think is hard, because you keep trying to then fill that role. And so in the last year, I've really tried to step back from that, where I'm like, no, I am not the go-to for this. You need to get your own therapist. You need to figure that out, but I can't be everybody's go-to.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. And setting those boundaries can be extremely hard. And
oh yeah. People have very strong reactions to it. And that to me I always tell clients, if somebody in your life is having a strong reaction to you setting a boundary, that probably means you're doing it right. It means you're doing it right.
Yeah. And people that have strong reactions to you setting a boundary, it's kind of, for me, it's like, oh, I should set this boundary, because if they're reacting so extremely to you saying, hey, I'm not going to be what I have, the role that I have been for a long time, hey, I'm not going to fulfill it anymore, and they have such a reaction of like, how dare you, then it's confirmation, like, you should not fulfill that role.
Right.
Because they're not appreciative, number one, and they don't recognize how it's affecting you. And the people that don't recognize that they're affecting you in a negative way, and they try to continue to like have that circle of like the role, hey, I'm fulfilling this role, you have to fulfill this role, I need you in this role, or I can't function properly. Dude, I've had to struggle with that for a very long time. Like, since I was really little. I think one of the like key memories I have as 5 years old is that my mother locked herself in her bedroom, I think for 2 days. And we had not eaten. And so my brothers were 3 and 1. And I remember, like, we didn't have cell phones, so we couldn't call our Mimi. And I don't think my brothers will remember this, but I do remember banging on her door. I don't know where my dad was. I was like banging on her door saying, I'm hungry. We're hungry. Your children are hungry. And then she was like, well, feed yourselves. That rings in my head all the time, because she would say it all the time. She would just leave and say, oh, you can feed yourselves. And I remember having to fulfill that role for me and my siblings, and it just continued. And me reparenting myself now as an adult with my dad dead and my mother is not a reliable person, I'll have to say feeding myself now is a act of love, and it is not just an obligation that I had to do as a kid. Because as a kid, you're supposed to be taken care of. And I wasn't. And so now the biggest act of self-love and reparenting myself is, I like to think of myself as little Grace and big Grace. And big Grace is feeding little Grace and making sure little Grace has all the support and love that she needs to continue to exist. Because I think when those of us go through these very chaotic households, it does impact our mental well-being in such a way that many people become suicidal. Why do you think that is?
Right. Well, it's like your whole system for tolerating distress is just busted. Like, my system was like so dysregulated, and sometimes it still is. Like, I like to joke and say I grew up not knowing what a crisis is, because the same level of reactivity was given whether we were out of milk or somebody died. It was like, I don't know what's a crisis. I don't know. And so as an adult, it's been a lot of unlearning that, wow, I can actually manage these things. Not everything is a 5-alarm fire. You know, some things I can tolerate. And I credit DBT a lot for that, you know, in helping me tolerate distress and regulate emotions and be in the present moment. And there was something you were saying, you know, that I was thinking about as you were saying, feed yourselves. And it almost feels though like that's a metaphor, because when we think about what do people need, even as adults, nourishment, and nourishment doesn't always mean food. Nourishment can mean love and support. Nourishment, like feeding other people, can be showing up for them. You know, it can be helping them with things. And the other part of that is food. When you think about the world, right? Food is something we use a lot for celebrations. Like when people even have funerals, there's food involved. And so like when you hear like feed yourself, it's like it's not just about, I think, consuming something because your body needs it, but for parents, when you feed the child, like nourishing them, it's this act of love. It's the act of showing up. You know, it's like, think about why whenever somebody gets upset, we're like, do you want milk and cookies? Like we give that to a kid because no, their body doesn't necessarily need the cookies, but the act of nourishing them. So just something that popped into my head when you were saying like, feed yourselves. I was like, that to me just goes beyond, like, I'm always, as a therapist, what's beneath that? Because what people show me on the surface is one thing, but beneath that is everything that I need to see and get to. So when I hear somebody saying to me, feed yourself, it's like, okay, what's really behind that? Because it's not just about the food.
Yeah. And, you know, whether or not, like, I know my mother's mental illness is very, very real. Whether or not she was intentionally, you know, she was neglecting us, whether or not it was intentional neglect or she was dealing with a lot on her own, which I do believe that she was, I fulfilled that role of caretaker for my siblings to the best of my ability, that now as an adult, I have to stop myself because it's not my job.
Right.
And
it never was really supposed to be your job.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be, but it was. And as an adult, I have both of my brothers are adults now, and I'm glad about it, but my partner has to remind me all the time if they ever ask for money or they ask for this or they ask for that, or they want me to intercede on their behalf for our mother or protect them for something or provide for them for something, my partner has to tell me all the time and remind me that's not your job. That you can't do that, because now that they're adults, you're preventing their further growth, and you're disabling them in a way. You're enabling their poor behavior, number one, he'll tell me, but you're disabling them so they don't know how to regulate these conflicts with your mother on their own without grace shield. Because growing up, if ever my mother was angry about anything, it was always I was the shield to protect my siblings from it. And they were either the shield for me too. I know my youngest brother was always the mediator. He always was trying so very, and still to this day, he tries so very hard to make sure everybody gets along. And it makes me so distressed, because I'm like, yes, I would love for us to all get along, but if I'm not going to accept mistreatment anymore. And he's like, well, oh, you should just let it roll off your back, like a water off a duck's back, because that's what our mother would always tell us, just let it roll off your back. I'm like, no, because it's not water, it's harm, it's mistreatment, it's I'm not going to accept it anymore.
We're not talking about somebody making just like a couple jokes at your expense. Like, we're talking about trauma, which is not the same. Like, if it's not water, then it's oil, or it's something, you know, molasses that doesn't roll off the back. Like, if you really want to go that way.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, when I hear you talking about your mom, like, one of the things that, because trauma and grief, I think, is such a cycle where, like, you accept it, you work on it, and then sometimes it comes back to find you again. And that's where in DBT we talk about radical acceptance, and my ability to remind myself of, okay, I have accepted this in the past. And when I was growing up, this was the 90s, the types of therapy that we have now were not readily available to our parents. If my mom needed DBT, it wasn't available to her. And so in some ways, like as much as you can get frustrated, or I could get frustrated with my parents, I also remind myself, like, what I have access to now, even the internet, is very, very different than what they had access to. And now, right, you can see your therapist on your computer, and that was not an option then. And so I think about, also the fact that there was more stigma around mental health than there ever was, than there ever was now. And so those things have changed. And so I do try, I guess it's the idea of extending grace, no pun intended, to my parents around what did they have access to and what did they not have access to. And so I do feel very lucky that I had, like I said, access and support, financial support, to be able to pursue any type of therapy, psychiatry. I mean, I've been on medication since I was 19, a ton of different medications. I've had so many different experiences, and I'm grateful that I had access to those things, and I think for me too is, when I was talking earlier about like the anger that I carried with me, is I've had to learn, especially through DBT, is that anger is not the enemy, right? The anger is not my problem so much as what I'm going to do with it becomes the problem. Because there aren't bad emotions. There's uncomfortable emotions. There might be emotions you don't like, but it doesn't make them bad. And I've had to learn that my anger, when I actually channel it into something that is helpful, can be incredibly productive and healthy. And I remember hearing someone say to me, or many people would say to me, well, I don't want you to be angry, try not to be angry. And I think about that. I'm like, in particular for women, how many women are walking around with like these parental wounds because they were told not to be angry? And I thought, but what if the way to healing was through the anger, and we deprive them of that because we don't believe that you should feel angry? And, with my anger, like it pushed me to keep going. Like the reason I'm in private practice now after a whole year of it is because my anger, it was that, frankly, rage at some things that had happened in my life that pushed me to be like, no, you need to keep moving because your life is on fire and you can't stand still here. It's not safe. So in hearing you talk about all that, it's like we make peace with things, and sometimes the emotion still comes up, and that's okay. The anger isn't, again, my enemy. It's what I want to do with it. It's what I plan to do with it that can make a situation catastrophic or positive or negative.
Yes. And I think a really big misconception about trauma and healing is that you're not supposed to be angry anymore.
Right.
And I hear it all the time. We have a Discord server where people can talk anonymously about the things that they're going through. And people will often say, I don't understand why I'm still so angry, or why I'm still so sad about this, why I'm still affected by this if it's been a year, or if it's in my childhood, like I should have moved on. And something that my therapist has told me is that the healing process, the grief process, anything that you go through, it's not linear. Sometimes there are loop-de-loops. And just because you're hitting the peak of a loop-de-loop or you're down on the slope doesn't mean that you're not still healing, doesn't mean that you're not still progressing through these difficult things, because, sometimes I really like to think of anger as your body's way of protecting itself. And if you're angry about something, that means that something that happened to you should not have happened, and it's you can't let it, what's the word I'm looking for? You can't let it sink you into a hole, like you said, with acceptance. Like you do have to accept the anger. And I think once you start to accept the anger, and yes, what you said, what you do with that anger, it really is super beneficial. Like I have been like so many emotions with the death of my dad. Like my dad died November 6th, 2021. And I was very much a daddy's girl. Very much so. And I will go through these waves of just being so angry that my dad is never going to see me get married, that he's never going to walk me down the aisle, that this injustice. And then I have to let myself feel that emotion, go through the whole thing, not repress it, and then think, okay, there's so much relief afterwards of just letting myself go through that entire emotion, just releasing it and having that acceptance of, yeah, I won't have my dad, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to be any less loved on that day. It doesn't mean that I won't have any less joy. And it's been so healing.
Right. So it's like, there's this quote that I sometimes share in the DBT group, and it always gets a reaction, and people genuinely sometimes hate it, and then eventually they like it, but it always says something like, you cannot heal what you cannot acknowledge. And so when things go left unsaid and we don't give them any attention, we don't acknowledge their presence, they find a way of coming back up every single time. And that I think was so much of what happened when I was younger, is that at 19, I was flooded with like the realization of like, wow, you're not in high school anymore. You're moving into adulthood. And I think that I really thought, you're not going to need to go to therapy that long, but there was so much that was underneath that surface, just boiling underneath of it, that if I hadn't gone to therapy, I don't know where I would be today. I really don't know. And the ways that I handled that anger, it was like, it just came spilling out of me in like a wave, when I was in college, from everything from overly drinking too much, restricting my own eating, like self-harm, and those kinds of things. And like that in itself is addicting. I think one of the things that you had commented from my Instagram, I think you had said, like, because there's a post on there where I talk about like my anniversary from self-harm, which I think it's okay for me to mention that. Yeah. And that's something that I was open about, because as a therapist, I have those scars on my body, and often people see them, and I think, people, they know when they know. And I think for me, it was always like something that later on I was embarrassed about. But when I was actively engaged in it, it was a way that I took out that anger, because it felt like when you have trauma and you grow up in chaos, you feel like you have no power whatsoever. You have nothing. And I remember when I first started doing that, for once in my life, I felt like I had a power now, because there was nothing anybody could do to stop me. And I remember that feeling, like being so aware of the fact that like, they think they can stop me, they can't stop me. And it finally felt like I had some power. Right. And so when you work with people who are coming to DBT, a lot of the time they have either been engaging in self-harm, they actively are. And for me, I have sometimes disclosed that I have experience with that, because I do understand the reasons why it happens. I'm never going to be the person or the therapist that tells them, well, no, don't do that. I don't want you to do that. And I understand that there are valid reasons why you think that is the way that you need to cope with things. And so I very much am open to talking about that. And I remember people trying to intervene and trying to help, but it didn't matter, because I was not in the place where I was going to hear any of it, because that rage was so loud in my head that all I wanted to do, and I didn't even care at that point, was just to see things just burn down in my life and be done with it. And, I look back at like things that just kept piling up. It was like the trauma freeway in my life, the things that just kept stacking up, like, it's like you move past one car accident only to see like another one up ahead. And like, even when I studied abroad, I studied abroad my junior year of college, some traumatic things happened for me over there that I never even told my own family about. And like coming back, and experiencing the ramifications of that, of like things that probably should have been reported, and not obviously getting into all the triggering details of that, but things that I had experienced from men over there, essentially, and coming back and trying to deal with that. Like there was so much rage there, and I didn't, again, know how to put that into words. And it was resurfacing from things that happened again with men when I was very little. So a lot of that trauma, right? I think about the language that we have to tell people about it, and how in therapy, when I work with people, I tell them there's no right way to tell me anything that you want to tell me. There's only just the words that you just use, just to say it out loud. And, that I think for me, like looking back on it, I had really great therapists that helped me to put that into words and helped me to process that, and I think that the anger at that point in my life was unhealthy because of the ways that I was dealing with it. And, I think about friends that I had, and I do think, I don't like to live with regret, but I think if I do have regret, it's that they were there and they were trying to help. And I wasn't going to hear it.
Yeah.
I think about my college roommate a lot, and we were roommates one year, and then we were just very close friends throughout college. And, even to this day, like sometimes it has come up where like, she didn't know what to do. And how could she have known? How could anybody have known what to do? So yeah, so there's a lot there for me, I think, in different like pockets of trauma that I've had to experience. And as an adult, like trying to reconcile those things. And that's where that, word that I was talking about earlier, now I can't think of what I was saying, reconciliation, like a reckoning, right? Is that coming to terms with those things as an adult and how they've impacted me. And I think, I'm 39 and people are always like, well, aren't you going to have kids? You'd be an excellent mother. And I think, well, yes, I would, but trauma takes from us. And I think one of the things, if anything, that I felt like trauma has taken from me is that desire maybe to be a mother.
Yeah.
Because when you have been responsible for other people a majority of your life, once you hit that point where like you could be a mother, you're just like, no, like I want my life to be finally for me and not about other people, So
I got chills. You said that you were a nanny before. I was also a nanny to 4 boys for 7 years. And I quit cold turkey in August, like early August, end of July. Oh my gosh. I raised the 2 youngest one, potty trained them, everything. I was third parent. I did. I love them all so very much. I'm not saying that I don't. I do. I love them all so very much. They as a family helped heal so many broken parts of me. And also I got paid. But I had like this like realization that if I keep taking care of other people, if I keep having to raise other people, I'm going to explode. Like my health was declining very rapidly. I started gaining a lot of weight, which was really bizarre because I did not eat much, like at all. And I've never had an issue with binge eating or eating to excess. It's quite the opposite. I have severe hypothyroidism. And my health was declining so rapidly. And then some of the boys were hitting puberty. So they were like clapping back at me, which valid. Go off, King. But I could not handle it. Like at all. I really, really couldn't. And so I had a mental breakdown one day after taking the 4 boys to urban air and another kid bullying one of my kids. And I was so filled with like rage. And I yelled at that child like nobody's business, that some mothers were like, why are you yelling at this poor child? But he harassed one of the boys and he kept harassing him and pursuing him. And when I tried to interject several times, he started to harass me and make fun of my body. And so I lost it on that child. And, their parents handled the situation once I brought the boys back home and everything was fine. But as soon as I got home, I had a mental breakdown. And I told my partner, Joey, I was like, Joey, I can't do this anymore. Can't be third parent. I can't do it anymore. I can't. I feel like I'm going to die. I feel like I'm dying. Like I'm in so much chronic pain. Like everything hurts. I started like throwing up. I had the most visceral reaction and then I started to seize. And he was like, you need to quit. I was like, but we don't have any money. He's like, I do not care if you are having this huge reaction over providing for other people. You have nothing for yourself. You need to quit. And so I did. And I started doing the podcast full time, and my health has gotten a lot better. But also it's just, I don't know, this overwhelming sense of guilt from time to time because I left that family of taking care of them and doing everything for them and solving all their problems. And now I'm like, I just have to focus on myself. I have no one to take care of but the pets and myself. And it has been such, like you said, a reckoning with myself of being like, I deserve to be taken care of. And I remember telling my partner, I was like, I don't think I could ever be a mom if I have to keep taking care of everybody else. I don't think I'd ever have the strength to be a mother. And I know that being a mom takes a lot, and I do want to be a mom, and I do want to have children. And I had that realization of like, if I keep taking care of everybody, I can't take care of myself. I can't do both at once. And I'm kind of proud of myself in a way of like quitting cold turkey and telling them, hey, I love you guys. Bye. Because they're fine. They're wealthy. They can get a new nanny. Like, they can always get a new person, but I can't get a new me. I can't. There's no way. If I'm in the depths of despair, if I suddenly die, if I have like a heart attack from a seizure and die, there's no replacing me. And I'm really grateful that, you know, my partner has enabled me to not have a job anymore other than this podcast, which this is a full-time job. It's very hard, but not have a job in which I'm exhausted, in which I have to do everything for everyone else, because that has been my entire life, is doing things for everybody else. And, you know, when I was going through like Instagram to try and find people to interview for the podcast, your Instagram really stuck out to me because every single one of your posts is extremely empathetic and so full of love and compassion and empathy. I was like, this is a person I need to have on the podcast. And, you know, I'm really intrigued by DBT. I don't have money, so I can't do DBT until I, you know, have income. But I really want to know more about DBT from you, because you're about to be certified. I'm manifesting it. You are going to be certified as a DBT therapist.
Yeah, I'm like, if the board hears this, maybe they'll reach out to me with that certification soon, as I'm waiting. Yeah, no, I've been doing DBT for 10 years now as a therapist, and it was something I learned in my early 20s. And I never, you know, again, it was just for me. And it wasn't until I went back to grad school where I was like, yeah, I really want to be the person that focuses on DBT. So DBT is similar in a lot of ways to CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, but it combines it with validation, which is probably where in my post, that's what you're picking up on, because the idea, right, is that if we approach change from telling a person, well, your thoughts are distorted, you just need to change them, a lot of the time there's some part of us that feels invalidated, because it's like there can be valid reasons why you think the way you think and believe the way you believe and act the way you act, and we still know that we are capable of change. So in DBT, like that word itself, dialectical, meaning these two things that seem like opposites, they can't possibly be true at the same time, are. And I love that because it flies in the face of those, like the absolute thinking of you're right or wrong, it's good or bad. In DBT, it's like, well, you could be both right and wrong at the exact same time. You know, you could be making progress in some ways and not progressing in others. And so it's always this balance, right, between this, and the and being the key word. And so in DBT, it's very skills driven, which I love, because there was a part of me when I was growing up that wanted to be a teacher. And so I feel like I am getting to live that in a way now, because I teach the skills into DBT groups. So DBT in itself, right, there's various components to it, and you need all the components for it to be considered adherent. And that includes individual DBT therapy sessions, the DBT skills group, and phone coaching. And I offer all three of those things. And, you know, the thing that I love about it the most is that there is this balance between seeing somebody as a person, like recognizing where they have been. Your trauma is valid. Even the fact that you self-harmed is valid. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong or good or bad, but it's valid because you had to find some way to deal with what you were going through, and you did not have, let's say, the skills to know otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, how else do we know how to cope with things if no one shows us? And if you grow up in a household where it's not modeled to you how to healthfully deal with your emotions. So in DBT, like there's a lot of validation, I think, in grace and understanding and empathy and compassion. And this push towards, well, what are you going to do about it now? Mm-hmm. Now that you know there are other ways to cope, what are you going to do about it? And that's where we come with our change strategies. Like, how do I help you change certain behaviors? You know, we talk about reinforcement, that idea that something's beneath the surface. Like, what is driving you to continue doing this behavior? And it's still valid. There are valid reasons why you're doing it. And now that we understand, though, that what you're doing is causing you harm, how do you want to do this differently? Mm-hmm. It's very collaborative, I think. And the skills themselves are practical. I feel like they just make sense. Mm-hmm. You know, some of my favorite skills, like one of them being opposite action, which is if I look at my emotion and I check the facts and I see that, okay, so my emotion is really coming more from the story I'm telling myself about what's going on, the assumptions, I'm going to engage in opposite action, which is I act opposite to what the emotion is getting me to do. So the emotion is like, you should isolate yourself because these people are mad at you. But I check the facts. I'm like, well, I don't actually know that they're mad at me. That's just what the emotion is telling me. I'm going to still reach out to people and get out of the house because it's the opposite of what that emotion is telling me. And, you know, and it can even be true, right, is that sometimes the emotion does make sense. And yet what we intend to do with it is problematic, which is, again, where I come from with anger, where it's like the anger isn't my problem. It's what I intend to do with it that can become the problem. So for me, the anger is like, what changes could I make? Are there any changes that I can make? You know, can I find a different way to approach this? Mm-hmm. Because holding on to it and doing what I was doing, especially in, you know, my early in my life, was not helping. You know, so DBT came to me at a very appropriate time, I think in my 20s. And ever since I learned it, it was something I just naturally started using. It really shifted how I approached life. And so getting the opportunity to really offer that to other people, I think is incredibly important to me. And there's so many things that I want to do with it in my practice, ways that I want to learn to offer DBT to different populations. You know, I'd love to have a second part that is a nonprofit. Yeah. Where I can hire people who've been through my DBT groups that want to get, let's say, certified peer specialist training. So I don't know if you have that in Texas, but essentially it's people who have recovered through their own mental health issues and substance use issues can get this training where they actually work in the field to help other people. And I have this idea where I could, you know, utilize that as a way to get DBT out there to people who need access to it. You know, people who don't have insurance or who can't afford to do the traditional DBT program. I could probably talk for DBT for hours. So if there are specific questions you have about it, feel free to cut me off.
So DBT has been proven to be effective for treating and managing a wide range of mental health conditions, including borderline personality disorder, self-harm, suicidal behavior, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse disorder, eating disorders, specifically binge eating and bulimia, depression, and anxiety. So off of those health conditions, which of them do you think that DBT is the most effective in treating?
Well, so it's interesting because, like, I would say borderline. However, substance use, eating disorders, those to me are also responses like that you can have when you are borderline. Yeah. So even if I'm treating somebody that has a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, a lot of the time they are coming with a multitude of issues, from substance use, self-harm, trauma, eating disorders, like they tend to just gather these things, and not because it's their fault. Their life is just often chaotic and, in upheaval. And so they don't know how to fix one problem before another one ignites. And so I think when we look at it, especially in terms of a diagnosis, the other interesting thing is I think a diagnosis can change, it can shift.
Mm-hmm.
What we think is one thing sometimes is not the same thing. For instance, a lot of women, especially in my age group, are getting diagnosed later in life with ADHD. I got diagnosed a little over a year ago with ADHD. We didn't know I had it. And some of the symptoms that present for ADHD, particularly with women, are similar to symptoms that come up with borderline. So I'm getting a lot of clients that are like, well, I have borderline, but I also might have ADHD. And it's like, well, which one is it? But what I say often is, to me, even if I don't know exactly what the diagnosis is, if we get you into treatment and we start the skills group and you start noticing positive changes in your life, that's all I need to know. Because a diagnosis can bring sometimes people like comfort, a sense of understanding. And I think, though, the diagnosis isn't the thing that's going to get you the skills that you need. It's not necessarily going to solve the problems. Learning the ways to do that and having access to resources and support, that's the thing that's going to help you.
Yes, definitely. Why do you think therapy is so valuable?
Oh, that's how much time do we have?
I have all day, so
so there are lots of reasons why it's valuable. I mean, I would not exist anymore if I didn't have access to therapy. I mean, every day that I wake up, I think, when I was younger, I did not plan for this, because in a lot of ways, I did not fully expect that I might still be here, which is sad to hear and alarming. But when you grow up in chaos and trauma, you sometimes believe that. And so for me, the benefit was it helped me find purpose. It helped me change how I looked at things. It helped me manage my emotions. It got me to go out into like my community and meet new friends that are like family. I mean, it has been everything to me. And I think I hear often people say, well, therapy isn't going to solve all my problems. And you're right. It can't solve everything. There's nothing that solves everything, except maybe a magic wand. And as a cheesy joke, those don't exist. And so when I think about therapy, though, even if, let's say, the problem is a chronic health issue, right? Your therapy isn't necessarily going to change that. But what it could do is to help you find ways to validate for yourself that you, in fact, do have a chronic health condition, because a lot of the times people can be gaslit into thinking that's not real, right?
Yeah.
It might help you to find ways to get support with that, whereas like you might have isolated before. It can alleviate depression and anxiety and panic attacks, which can cause flare-ups with chronic health conditions. So even if it's not entirely solving the problem, it may make your approach to it stronger, more resilient, and have access to things that you wouldn't have had you not reached out to a therapist. I mean, I'm really good at finding resources for people, especially if it's something that I can't do. I'm like, okay, let me find something so that you can get help with this.
Yes. Yes, that is one of my skills that I have, I think acquired is a good word, of finding resources for other people. That's part of my job here on the podcast, other than hosting, editing, producing, all those sorts of things, is on the Discord server. If someone needs help with something, I can find a resource for them, and usually it's a free one, because I so desperately wish that therapy was more accessible.
Yeah.
It's becoming more so increasingly over time, and I'm very encouraged by that. Yeah. But with inflation is killing the middle class. I'm just going to say that. It really is. Inflation is destroying everything right now. And because of that, things like therapy that people do need, I do believe that therapy is a necessity, is kind of going by the wayside. People are cutting out things like supportive mental health stuff. They're cutting out these, I guess you could say, what are they called? starts with an E.
Luxuries or
They're
like, well,
luxuries. Yeah. They're luxuries. They think, oh, therapy is a luxury. It shouldn't be. It really
Mhm.
shouldn't be.
Right.
And it makes me extremely sad because, you know, I've kind of been lower middle class my entire life, but now I am impoverished.
Mhm.
And, you know, there really isn't anything I can do because I am physically and mentally disabled currently. And
Mhm.
I've been trying to apply for disability since February, and it's September. Last week, they finally sent me the paperwork to fill out.
Mhm.
And there's not many resources for people who have been through significant trauma that now it's disabling to
Right.
them.
Mhm.
And like you said, with the whole, like, you have chronic health conditions, but you've been gaslit. That's been me my whole life. My entire life. I've told my mother, I have a really bad headache. I have a migraine.
Mhm.
Since I was itty bitty, she would like have this anecdote to her friends that little Grace would always be like, oh, Tylenol, mommy, Tylenol. I need
Mm.
Tylenol, because I was in pain 24/7.
Mhm.
I'm in pain now. I don't know. I cannot remember. I cannot recall a time when I was not in pain of some sort. And I've been gaslit my whole life, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, of being like, oh, you're just exaggerating. You're just a drama
Mhm.
queen. You're you're just trying to get attention. My entire life, by my family and subsequently by my friends, because they would hear my family say, oh, she's just exaggerating.
Mhm.
No, I'm not. No, I bloody well am not exaggerating. It's so real. And I
Mhm.
so desperately wish that there were more free options for people who are lower income for mental health, because in my own opinion, those people suffer the most because they can't get
Right.
help.
And I've worked, in a number of different places. And I'll tell you, my first job out of grad school, I was paid $20 if the person showed up for therapy. And if they didn't show up or they canceled, you didn't get paid. And I remember thinking, like, how am I going to afford to live if that's what I'm being paid? And it's like the system is taxed. It is very taxed right now because of the number of people, the sheer number of people that need the help. But it's where I don't take insurance. And the main reason, right, being because I feel like insurance companies will, number one, they'll dictate to you what your value is, your worth, and you're not actually supposed to talk about what they're going to pay you with other therapists, which makes me think then you probably are doing something wrong if I'm not allowed to talk about it, like Fight Club or something. And like, don't talk about it. Like, what are they going to do? And it's like the fact that sometimes you don't get reimbursed. They might say, oh, we're going to reimburse you. And then 5 weeks later, we're not actually going to reimburse you. And it's like this game where like you have a livelihood, it's not as if like I'm Scrooge McDuck, like rolling around in my money pit over here. But the cost of living, like you said, has gone up. And we have a real problem. And I often sometimes, especially when I can't sleep, try to think about solutions to this, because I like to be, I guess it sounds cheesy, but a system disruptor, where I'm like, there's got to be a better solution to this. Even one of the things I've toyed around with is this idea, and I've read about some places that do this, where rather than just take the insurance or charge a fee every time you need something, they almost run it like a gym membership, where you pay a monthly fee and you get a certain amount of services under that fee.
Mhm.
And so again, I don't know how well that works out financially for the people doing the work, et cetera. I'm going to look into it, to be honest. But it's something where in my mind, I'm like, okay, we have a system where, an insurance can dictate how many sessions you get of something. I mean, I remember having arguments with people on the phone from insurance companies, desperately trying to get people, when I worked in a partial hospitalization program, additional time for things. And this person on the other line never met the person that's in front of me, would deny them coverage no matter what I said. And so it's the system, right? It is broken. And I think that collectively, we really need to sit down and look at that and come up with better solutions. Like, even the fact that as a therapist, right, I am licensed to practice in the states of Delaware and Pennsylvania. If I wanted to practice and see somebody in California, I can't.
Mhm.
It all comes down to money and things. They try to say, oh, it's ethics, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, we have access to the internet. If this person's in distress, I can call 911. I need to Google something. I'm sure they'll have, there are other reasons why that's happening. But to me, it feels like a way, again, of keeping people stuck. Because if you're somebody, let's say in the Midwest, who doesn't have access to DBT and you find a great therapist you like, but they're in New Jersey, how are you going to get to see them if they're not licensed to practice in your state? You're not. So it's like there are these holes in the system, I think, that need to be looked at and managed, because you're right, like the world is on fire right now, like kind of like your little logo for trauma dump, like it is a dumpster, and I don't want to leave any of this on a bleak note and be like everything sucks, everyone just like get it together. But I do feel like there are a lot of people similar in a sense to me, and like the way of thinking of like, okay, we got to find a different way to attack this problem. And that's something I'm very passionate about, and I've only been in private practice now a little over a year. And so that first year was really like learning how to do this, and I did succeed with it. And now from here, it's like, what else can I do to get this therapy in the hands of people that need it, and they don't have to break the bank to get it? They don't have to worry about their insurance company saying, no, we're not going to cover that. Like, how do I help do that? Because for me, that is the most important thing, is that
Definitely
people get access to it. And that's why I mentioned the peer support specialist, because I'm like, these are the people that I need who have lived experience, that know DBT. They are incredibly valuable. Everybody's valuable. And these people are incredibly valuable to our system. They can work in prisons. They could work in, sobriety houses, recovery houses. They could work in homeless shelters, schools. These are people that could give access to DBT in ways that other people won't have access to it. And maybe the same goes for other types of therapy as well. They're not doing full therapy sessions, but maybe they can teach somebody something that just saves their life.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I do feel like I was failed by my schools, by my churches, especially when it comes to mental health. And I know I can't be the only person, because you have these school counselors, most of them do not have any degree in social work or any degree in therapy. At least those I like went to public schools in Texas. They did not. And it's not really a regulated thing. Not shitting on the people that decide to be school counselors. Y'all are angels. But the things that they would tell me messed me up even further as a child, because I remember going to my 5th grade student counselor, student guidance, whatever their classification was. And I said, hi, I haven't had any breakfast or lunch, and for some reason, I don't qualify for the free lunch program because my parents won't fill out the application, because they were prideful, number one. But I was like, is there any way that I can have food? And she was like, oh, just bring food from home, honey. I was like, little 5th grade me was like, well, I would if I had food at home. And she was like, oh, just ask your mommy. I'm sure that your mom can get you some food, or ask your daddy, or, you can always go ask a friend if they'll share their lunch with you. I was so frustrated. And eventually I was moved school. I went to 14 different schools growing up. And then at the next school that I was at, they had a free lunch program, but my mother had decided to pack my lunches. But I never knew when she was going to pack a lunch, because she would put it in my backpack. So sometimes I wouldn't even check my backpack because I thought there's not going to be anything in there. And so I would get the free lunch every single time, and bring home the food that she had packed in my lunch to eat for dinner sometimes. And the school had called my mom and said, hey, is there something going on at home? Because Grace is getting the free lunch every single time. And I remember my mom yelling at me, like, why would I even go to any of this trouble of packing your lunch if you're just going to get the free lunch now? And it really messed me up. And I think back on that, that's all because little Grace was like, oh, this counselor told me that this is my own responsibility, you know, without telling me this is my responsibility, but telling me this is my responsibility to feed myself. And my mom always yelling at me sometimes to feed myself, not like always, sometimes I do stuff like that, but it was regular. And so then I fed myself, and now I'm getting yelled at for feeding myself, and it's a free.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've seen so many cases like that as a therapist, and even times where like, and this hasn't happened since I've been in private practice, but in my previous roles where we've reported things, even like a child coming and saying they're being abused. And like, not every time that happens, like you would think it does, like on TV, is someone coming in and removing the child from the home. You know, sometimes they are going home. And at that point, I don't know what's going to happen. And it's the system, like the loopholes, the things you have to jump through just to get somebody help. Even if you needed to get somebody committed to the hospital that didn't want to go, the loopholes, and I understand there's a whole legal aspect to this, but the loopholes that you're making people jump through just to get this person safe is very, very taxing. It's very hard to do. And even then, like when they get discharged from the hospital, a lot of the things, like we're talking about shelter, food, access to clean water, those kinds of things, if that's not already in place, the things that brought them to that hospital, it's just going to keep persisting. Just like for kids, if you don't have your basic needs being met, how are you expected to learn or deal with anything else?
Yeah, definitely. And so the weird dichotomy of, yes, mental health is becoming more available, but also there's like a paywall. And it makes me so frustrated. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to start this podcast, was people need to become more trauma informed, number one, so they recognize what they're going through is an issue so they can fix it. And also to provide as many free resources as I can, or as many, you know, skills, resources, like, hey, look at this has helped me, maybe this will help you, because this is all I can do right now. You know, I'm not a licensed health professional. I just have gone through a lot of trauma, and I know for a fact there's people out there who are going through a lot of trauma that are being so suppressed under this system that is not served. I don't know who it's serving. I mean,
I could probably tell you that. I could probably tell you that. I think it serves the pockets of the people making the money. You know, you talk about your insurance companies, like someone makes the money off of those things, you know, someone makes the money off of people in different levels of care. I mean, there's a reason why I think a lot of insurance companies do not cover holistic health services. Because if we had doctors that were, you know, really focused on not just your physical health, but your mental health, we probably wouldn't need to keep engaging in that system, right? So when you give people the treatment they need piecemeal, like here's something, you're not treating the whole problem, right? You're just treating parts of it. And that means it's most likely to return. You're staying stuck, you know, so I think there's a whole system there designed that it keeps us stuck. And that's where I think as a therapist, it's like, how do I work within that system and find like-minded people that want to do something different? Because if we can't, it's like, if you can't get the people with the money to hear you and to change things, is it possible then to find a solution? It's like building your own table and saying, okay, we're all going to sit here now, and this is how we're going to figure it out. You know, I don't have all the solutions to that, but it's something that I do think about a lot, of like, what could I do for my part in order to make this better for people? You know, because you're right. Like, I see so many people that do not have everything they need just to exist, you know, in a physical sense, like food, or access to quality medical care for chronic health conditions. And it's like, how could we expect this person to have hope if the things that they need, the basic things, are not being met? And it's not a matter of just, well, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get to work, because again, if that solved things, then not everybody would be struggling collectively right now. You know, like the cost of living has gone up, the cost of gas has gone up, like the cost of food, everything has gone up. And yet we're still looking at, things like minimum wage that hasn't really changed. And it's very, very tough. I feel like I'm really, making things very positive on this podcast right now, where I'm like, I'm the therapist and I'm like, everything is terrible.
I mean, it's important to recognize it isn't all sunshine and rainbows.
No,
I mean, no one goes to therapy because everything is
Right.
sunshine and rainbows and their lives are so perfect, right?
Right.
I mean,
I will say this, the hope that I have as a person and as a therapist and somebody who is getting up there in age, my wise years of almost hitting 40, is that I do have hope in the sense that I look at your generation, because you're Gen Z, right?
mm-hmm.
And I look at your generation and I think, in every generation, right? That sounds like the episode of Buffy, if you know the show, in every generation.
Yeah,
but in
Buffy
every
the
generation, right, there are obviously there are issues. But there's also, I think in your generation in particular, what I notice is that fire internally that we need to make those changes happen. Whereas your generation, and the people younger than you are able to vote, and the people, are able to say, hey, this isn't working, we need to make a change. I do think that that's going to happen, because a lot of the antiquated policies and things that we have right now are not there because of Gen Z. They're not even there because of my generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those things don't tend to change when the people that are in favor of them are still running the show.
Uh-huh.
So I feel like and no, that doesn't give us a solution right now, but my hope is in just meeting and interacting with people in your generation is that I think there is hope. I think that there is the ability to change things.
Yes, I do believe that there is the ability to change things. And I think the start of that is to recognize things need to change. These things are not serving us. And more people in my generation, I think it's like kind of a great awakening almost of, past generations, they've admitted, hey, yeah, this is shitty, but it is what it is, right? There's that complacency. And I refuse to be complacent anymore, because it just makes you sick. Being complacent just makes you ill. And I can't do it anymore. I can't sit idly by while I am being abused by the system, because I am. No one deserves to be in poverty. I really could not give a shit about like what their choices are. Oh, they've made a bad choice, so they deserve to be in poverty. No one deserves to be in poverty. No one deserves to starve. No one deserves to wonder where their next meal is going to come from. No one deserves to feel fear about, oh, if I get a flat tire, I'm not going to be able to pay for my rent. Like, that's something that is so normal now. That is so normal that if I get a flat
doesn't
tire,
mean either, right? Poverty doesn't mean either like that we're talking about people like, yes, I want people to have access to things that bring them joy, but poverty doesn't even just mean like people having access to fancy things. We're talking about basic needs, like true poverty of like, you don't have those things that you need, food scarcity and like the access to quality living, like safe neighborhoods. Like that is what we talk about when we talk about poverty. And so I think, there's problems with that. And it's very hard. One person can't solve all of it. That's again, like where I think collectively, like I look at different generations and I know like everybody in every generation again gets a bad rap for something.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's entitled for anybody to think that we have access to things that could help people not be hungry, and we're not doing it. Like we have access to being able to give people better outcomes with healthcare, and we're not doing it. It can be very defeating. And that's why I think, again, I look at, okay, so the world, everything is always moving forward. And DBT, we say the only constant is change. And so that can be both positive or negative, I suppose, depending on how you look at it. Negative in the sense of like, I don't like change, things change, but positive in the sense of, if that is true, the things that we are struggling with now may not always be that way. And there, to me, is hope when I see people who are passionate about causes and out there trying to make change happen and not just talking about it. Like that is something I'm very aware of. And I feel like for me, like, yes, I'm much older, but like that fire internally of like, well, that sucks and that's not okay. What can I do to change that? Has been there since I was a kid. I mean, my mom has always been a big proponent of that in my life of like, fighting for different causes and people and, marginalized groups. Like that fire definitely comes from my mom. And that's another way that I think about like, okay, yes, there are these layers of things in that relationship, but I also know that there are a lot of aspects of who I am as a person, even the creativity that come from my mom. So
Nice.
yeah.
That's beautiful. And I'm glad that you have that connection with your mom. I mean, I love my mother very much.
Yeah.
And I so wish that she heals and
Yeah.
gets better. I really, really do. But part of my healing was like I can't be there for you. I can't be your support. And I feel like my entire life was like, how can I make things less stressful for my mom? How can I lighten her load? How can I do this? How can I do that? Like, how can I make sure my mom isn't mad at me? How can I make sure my mom isn't mad at my brothers? If my brothers haven't done something, how can I make sure that I do it so that they don't get in trouble? And I guess I've lived with this constant fear of, is my mother mad at me? And that got transmuted into, are my friends mad at me? Or is my partner mad at me? Because I guess I lived in this constant fear that if I did something wrong in quotation marks, that would be the end of the world, because then someone would be angry with me and then I wouldn't get my needs met.
Right. Right.
And it has been super, I guess, hurtful in realizing that as an adult, that, the things that I should have had as a child, which I guess my mother lives in delusion of saying, oh, I gave you such great birthday parties and I always got you these presents. But, the true like caretaking she did not do. And as an adult, I'm recognizing that, and I've told her to her face, hey, you didn't love me the way that I needed you to. And the denial of being like, oh, I did whatever I could. And kind of that acceptance of being like, well, that wasn't enough.
Well, one doesn't cancel out the other either. Right.
Yeah.
And I always try to say that is like, people can show up for you in some ways and then abandon you in others. And it's like, just because people, like, let's say, financially support you does not absolve them of other ways in which they weren't there. And no, nobody's perfect and you can't be 100% there all the time. But we're not talking about that, right? We're talking about the basic things that a child needs, that support, that love, to not be screamed at, to have access to food, to have somebody that shows up consistently, forming secure attachment. That's what a kid needs. So I think that when people say things like that, it's their attempts, to absolve themselves of that guilt. Maybe they carry guilt and shame, which are two different things, about how they were there as a parent and how they weren't there as a parent.
Yes. And I'm so grateful for some of the friends that I have made since my mother has kind of discarded me for the last time. I'm going to say she's discarded me for the last time, and I'm not going to allow her to do it again. And part of me not allowing her to do that again is I'm not going to be close with her. I'm not going to allow her that closeness, because it's, what is the word I'm looking for? Me being close with my mother is not something that is a right of hers. It's a privilege.
Right.
And I'm so thankful for my friends because they reinforce that. Like, one of my closest friends that we've known each other since we were 14, and she went on one of my family vacations with me, and she knows the way that my mother treats me. And she reinforces to me, she's like, I know you so desperately want your mother's love and affection and admiration, consideration, all of those things. And I know how hard it is for you whenever she'll text you that she loves you, because her ways of showing love or affection are not conducive to the abuse that she'll put you through. Like, we should not doubt that she loves you, but what we should do is protect you, because you cannot let her in a place where she has that much of a effect on you anymore. Because I mean, she's one of my best friends. She's seen me like break down sobbing, suddenly get a nosebleed, start coughing up blood because I'm just in so much distress over it. And it breaks her heart. And I'm so thankful for her. She lives upstairs. Like, we live in the same apartment complex. Like, I'm so grateful for her because she has been such love and support for me. And I've been such love and support for her because we've both been through so much trauma. And I think part of the healing process is finding that support system, especially if it's one that you have lacked growing up. And she has been that for me. And I want to ask you, what support have you found that has been super beneficial for you in your healing?
I think definitely friends, like throughout my life. And then I think also, you know, like where I live, I don't live near family. I mean, most of my family is at least 2+ hours away. And so, like, really trying to get out of being introverted and finding community. I mean, there's lots of places near me that I like to go to, and I know people in my neighborhood, which is really cool. Shout out to my favorite cafe here in Media, Cafe Isla. They are wonderful people. And the nice thing about it is, like, I go in there and they're always talking to me, and like they're good supports and friends and stuff. And even like the place where I go to do pottery classes, I met so many wonderful people there who feel like family, you know. And I think for me, it was like really delving into the community that I have access to. And like where I live, one of the nice things is it's very walkable, so that like I'm not far from activities and finding things to do. And, you know, part of that was, I think, also getting out of my own way and my own comfort zone, and knowing like you need to put yourself out there and be open to meeting new people. Because as somebody who's been through so much trauma, there's a large part of me that used to think like I wasn't deserving of it. You know, like I used to say, like, I always, from the time I was very young, I can't remember, not now, but I can't remember then really liking myself. And that makes it very hard, you know, especially when you're a kid, to find relationships. And like, you know, I used to refer to myself as a monster, and like seeing myself now as the opposite of that has been a lot of work. But finding community has helped, because it makes me think, okay, like these are people who are not your family, you're not related to them, and yet they continue to want to be a part of your life, and they continue to want to know you. And that reinforces the opposite idea that I don't have value and I don't have worth. Because why would they want to get to know you if you didn't have value, you know, or if you truly were a monster?
Something I have to reinforce for myself all the time is that my value is inherent, that my value is not in what I can do, in my talents. It's not in what I can provide for other people, but my value is inherent in just me being me. And that has been so healing, because I am a people pleaser. I like to be there for people.
Right.
As a child, that was my worth. Like, my papa, my Jamaican grandfather, would tell me all the time was to represent my name, represent grace. And so I took that to the extreme as a child, of being a people pleaser and being a doormat and letting people walk all over me. And, you know, my mother's saying of, let it slide off you like water off a duck's back. So people would just abuse me all the time. And I would just accept it because I'm supposed to be Grace. Yeah, Gigi? Gigi's trying to talk. She's like, oh, yes, mother. but like I'm supposed to show grace. And my papa would tell me, grace means undeserved love and kindness. So anyone that treats you poorly, you just got to show them love and just kill them with kindness. And now as an adult, I'm reparenting myself to be like, no, that's not where my value is. My value is not just showing people love, showing people compassion. I'm not going to stop doing those things, but that's not where my value lies. I don't suddenly become less valuable because I'm not showing people love or showing people grace.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been super helpful, especially with my like self-image. My perception of myself is like, I'm a cool person just by existing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty cool. I'm pretty cool. And I want to reinforce to our listeners that your value is inherent. Your value does not lie in your works, your achievements, any of that. Those are just bonuses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard, but it's an affirmation that I have to tell myself every morning when I wake up. It's like, when I look in the mirror after I brush my teeth, I am beautiful. I have value. And no matter what happens, I'm going to persevere. Because if I don't tell myself that, I recognize I have a very bad day.
Mm-hmm.
It's try to set myself up for success, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think the way that you talk to yourself matters a lot. Like the things that I say, especially when I'm struggling, is like, what do I tell myself? And being able to kind of rewrite the script in my head of, you're not a monster. You do have value. You do have worth. You've always had those things. Even if other people mistreat you, it doesn't mean that you don't have value or worth. That is more of a reflection of them than it is of you. And like not allowing things to chip away at that sense of self has been really, really difficult. But something that has been very important to me is like to just be who I am, and in the last year, like reconnecting even with like the creative things that I enjoy doing, drawing and pottery and stuff, because that is part of of me, and I think that sometimes like I lose sight of that when things would get hard. I think, oh, I don't have time to attend to that. And yet those are things that bring me joy. And through that joy, I find value. I feel like me.
Yes. Your Instagram itself is extremely beautiful. Do you make your own graphics?
Oh, I use Canva, but I design all of it together. Like that is all me, like pulling together the fonts and stuff. And, that's, I think my background. I'm using that fine arts background, to make the Instagram. People have said like, oh, you should make a TikTok, which maybe, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm up to TikTok level, but with the Instagram, yeah, I was just thinking, okay, just share some of the skills, like just share skills, put them in a way that is, understandable to most people. People I think respond well to it because of the cute graphics and everything, which is nice. But yeah, like I've gotten a lot of positive feedback around it, and just being able to kind of, have like a consistent theme or feeling in my Instagram is what I wanted. So it's really nice that you notice that and you're like, yeah, I see that about what you're doing. So
yes, I do. And I do think you could definitely have a very successful TikTok. It does take a little while to get an audience, but yes, definitely. And you use Canva, you can always like do the little animated of your skills, just make it animated as it's like typing it out. And you could definitely make a video format for each of your Instagram posts to post over on TikTok. And I'm sure that would reach a wider audience and help a lot of people, because I really do enjoy your content. Anytime it shows up on my feed, I'm liking that and reposting it because it's beautiful. And it, just because it's on Canva, which I also use Canva for everything for my Instagram as well, it doesn't mean that you didn't design it, right? And it doesn't mean it didn't take a lot of work, because I know it takes a lot of work.
Oh, it really does. Like the amount of time I spend like perfecting what font am I going to use? And is this too big? And, what words are you going to highlight? Is this graphic? And like, I just love like how much is available to me using Canva. Because like sometimes I'm like, I have to find a way to use this graphic of an angry sea otter. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I have to find a way to put this in one of my Instagram posts. And so like even when I'm doing my DBT groups, I make a slideshow through Canva and I'll find like the most clever puns and stuff that I can make using the graphics, because I'm like, I have to find a way to do this. I have to work in the zombie unicorn into this slide. And I have actually worked the zombie unicorn into the slides for emotion regulation, but that's a different conversation.
That's awesome. And having that creative outlet must also be healing for that inner teen that wanted to go into interior design. And that it's also another full circle moment, because you're utilizing all of these talents that you possess, and you're growing them. And I'm really super thankful that you wanted to be on this podcast. From the bottom of my heart, I'm so encouraged by your story and by all the work that you have accomplished, because you keep saying that you're older. You're not. First of all, you're still in your prime, okay? And it's so encouraging, because yeah, I'm 23 and I don't know how long I live. I hope I'm going to be a 90-year-old grandma. Most Taylor women reach their 90s, and that is what I am hoping for, because I really want to be a grandmother that smacks people with a stick. That's just like a loose cannon. That's like my dream. All of my friends are like, why are you just so like envisioning being a cranky grandma? That is my dream. But
well, if it's your dream, it's your dream. You know, I envision myself as being the really cool aunt in the family that like invites the children over to my European getaway, and the children being my niece and nephew, who are like the two most important people in my entire existence. But yeah, I envision myself as being like the cool aunt who's like, yes, come and stay with me in my house abroad and I'll take you on fancy trips. That's my life goal.
Yes, and I think you'll achieve it. I definitely do. Maybe somewhere in like Scotland or Ireland.
Oh my God. Yes. No, that's actually exactly where I want to go. Or England, like the English countryside. Because I want to live in the cottage that is Kate Winslet's. I mean, who doesn't, from The Holiday?
Yes.
Which is the movie I watched when, like, if I'm feeling really overwhelmed or triggered, that's the only movie people watch. So I've seen it 1,000 times. But yeah, that's my dream, is to have the cottage from The Holiday and just live out the rest of my life in that cottage in the English countryside.
It's a great dream. Like, I have a Scottish flag right here. Beep, beep.
Oh, wow.
I have gotten into, I think, 3 different universities in Scotland for film. My lifetime goal is to become a film director. And I can't afford going to Scotland, but I did get into all of them.
That is amazing. Even just getting into that, I feel like, is something like just to be proud of, right? Like that's how I felt going to grad school, where I was like, okay, even if you apply and you don't, necessarily get in, like the fact that you even put yourself out there is a good thing, because I never thought I would do that.
Yes.
So good for you.
Thank you. And last year in October, my partner and I did go to Scotland to visit one of the universities, which is the University of Stirling and Stirling, Scotland. And I love it there. And I told him, I was like, bro, this is our lifetime goal. And he's like, yes, this is our lifetime goal. Like maybe in our 30s, 40s, we will live here forever. And, I know that to become a film director, it's going to take many, many years. I've known that since I was itty bitty little Grace. Because my goals have not really ever changed, but I think this podcast is an outlet, number one, for, creativity. I'm producing, I'm editing, I'm shooting, I'm hosting, I'm doing all the things that I learned because I have a bachelor's in theater and I also have an associate's in arts. And so this is part of Creative Grace. And then also, I feel like this can be used to help so many people. And that's also what I want to do with my films. I really, really want to make trauma-informed movies about people going through very difficult things and kind of shining a light of like hope, but not making it all sunshine and rainbows, because a lot of movies that deal with like a traumatic event, like, oh, this traumatic event, oh, I lost this one person that meant so dearly to me, and oh, flashback. Oh my goodness, but oh, I'm an old lady and I'm reminiscing. I don't want anything like that. I want a full circle moment, and that is my goal. And I think for me to make those movies, I need to become more trauma informed. So also this podcast is enabling me to learn so much more from other people's experiences, what they've gone through, and hopefully one day I can draw from them and make something that other people will enjoy and be able to reflect upon in a positive way that can help them grow. Gigi, you be nice to the mailman. The mailman just showed up. But that can help them grow. And that's all I want. That's all I want.
I love that.
I'm so excited. So speaking directly to our listeners, what would be your message about healing from trauma?
I would say that, as sometimes scary as it might sound, I think that it's entirely worth it to go through, therapy for trauma, support groups for trauma, even learning more about trauma, because it not only helps you, it helps other people. But I find it's really hard to show up for yourself and the people you care about when things haven't been healed. And when we haven't even maybe tried to heal some of those things. And I do believe that, when people are ready, they will do what they need to do. They'll find a way to go to therapy or, joining a support group. But I definitely think that part of that is not being afraid to try, not being afraid to try and heal it, because it does take time, and it does sometimes take, doing different things to get there. And for me, that was entirely true, and it was very worth it.
So well put. Oh, Gigi wants to say hello.
Oh, she heard me talking. She was like, I would like to work with that therapist.
Do you want to work with the therapist, Gigi? Like, yes, I would. All right. So do you have any resources or recommendations you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, there were some there's lots of great podcasts, yours included, out there about different therapy topics. And I always recommend that to people. There are specific DBT based podcasts that you can look at, on Spotify or even Apple. So I like those. I also think there are a lot of YouTube videos. So there's one in particular that's called DBT RU. So it's like DBT Rutgers University. And they have made all these really cool videos, like they're cartoons, explaining DBT concepts and skills. And so I often use those in my groups because I feel like they really do a nice job of explaining a concept in a short amount of time. And those are obviously all free to access those. I also think that there's a website, I think it's www.dialecticalbehavioraltherapy.com.
Okay.
But it has, again, free worksheets, videos, concepts. So a lot of those are really excellent, especially if you don't have access to a DBT group. And even Amazon has a lot of DBT workbooks that are, very self-driven, where you could get one of those, even if you had a therapist that, let's say, is not versed in DBT, and follow along on the workbook. And I'm sure that therapist could, support you as you do that. So there are a lot of free resources out there that I think, YouTube, podcasts, books, things that people can access that can, supplement the work you're doing or give you access to DBT.
Awesome. So I will include all of that in the description down below on both YouTube and Spotify. So if you need any resources, any free ones, we also have a lot over on our Discord for the podcast. And I do have a DBT channel over on our Discord that has some resources that Erin sent me herself. So those are over on our Discord if you want any more resources. Right. Okay. So my last question is, how are you feeling right now?
I feel really good. I feel, my first podcast, and I know I'm the first therapist you've had on this, which is an honor. No, I feel really good. It, is I think sometimes it can be hard to talk about your own experiences, but for me, again, being a therapist has been a huge privilege, and being able to use the things I think that I have lived through as a way of even drumming up empathy and understanding for other people, and being willing to be patient and look past how they present out on the surface to say, like, what else is going on there, is directly attributed to the therapy that I've done for myself. And so thinking about all that and the opportunity to come here and hopefully talk about my experiences and maybe make people feel less alone, or even just, finding resources or having access to skills that I might even share on my Instagram, to me makes me feel really good.
Yeah, let's go. Thank you so much for being on this episode. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your advice, your experiences. We love you very much, and we'll
Thank you.
see you later.
So at the end of every week, we spin our wheel of emotions to learn a new emotion and how it correlates to trauma. It landed in between startled and scared. So startled is more of a surprise response, and being scared is more of a fear response. So surprise is usually more positive, and fear is usually more negative. This thing is kind of straddling the line between the two. So when I think of being startled, it happens to me every day. When you are going through significant trauma, your brain is more receptive to fight, flight, freeze response. And it's always trying to protect you. Some ways to curb those fear responses, those surprise responses, is through therapy, is through, introducing yourself to new experiences and giving yourself an escape plan almost, and showing yourself that new experiences are okay. And if you don't like those new experiences, you can always do something else. So for me, what curbs those surprise, startle, fear responses is to have a loving, supportive group of people around me, and to hardly ever do anything alone, because I know that if I have those surprise responses, I might have a seizure. And honestly, part of my success in healing is finding a strong group of supportive friends who will be there for me and will try new things with me. And it has really helped. It has really helped me heal. It has really helped calm those stress responses. And it has really helped me start to try things on my own. And it's been super beneficial. Here are our memes of the week from our Discord. If you would like to be in next episode's memes of the week, please post your memes in our Discord channel in the meme server. And we will pick a variety of iconic memes. Maybe yours is going to be the next iconic meme in our meme of the week.
You just saved me. I'm free.
I'm not single. I'm taken. Taken for granted.
Special thanks goes out to all of our Discord users. Thank you so much for being on our Discord, and thank you for watching this episode of the podcast. It really means the world to me. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to support our podcast, we have a Patreon, and we also have a bonfire where you can get custom apparel designed by yours truly. This shirt, this Be Kind to Your Mind, I designed this and I tie-dyed it myself to make it more custom for me. So if you would like to get a shirt like this, go check us out over on Bonfire. Remember, you are capable of a fulfilling life in spite of your circumstances and your trauma. May you rise again from the ashes and be filled with peace, love, hope, joy, and understanding. I'll see you guys next Sunday. Goodbye.